Jesus is Lord. And he was such a nice Jewish boy. Jesus changed my life, and he's still in the life-changing business.
As Paul said, the love of Christ compels me.
You know, Randy, I think most people don't realize how much darkness there is in the world.
It can't be just coming to church and getting pumped up with you and I are all going to have something of faith in us by which we
Jesus died
stand.
to save sinners, and you are a sinner.
Shalom and welcome to CrossTalk. My name is Randy Weiss. I'm a Jewish believer in a Jewish Messiah. His name is Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. I love Israel and I love the Jewish people. And some of you may have the mistaken notion that Israel is less than wonderful. You're mistaken. It's very wonderful. Israel is a glorious place, and God has revealed His love and really His magnificence in the land of Israel. You probably don't realize that it's not an apartheid state. It's not a cancer in the region. If you listen to the news and hear the rhetoric from some of the Arab detractors, you'd think that Arabs in Israel are mistreated and Muslims don't have a voice or a life in Israel. And that's just, it's really a ridiculous kind of position to believe. It's just simply not true. What you may not be aware of is that a Gallup poll recently showed that in the happiness index of all the nations in the world, 143 nations, the survey was done, Israel is number 11 as we're the happiest people. The 11th happiest group of people on earth live in Israel. And those who would suggest that, oh, there's so much suffering in Israel, and what you need to understand, according to a scientific type survey done by Gallup, I mean a respected polling organization, Israel, the people of Israel, 4% of the people in Israel say they suffer. And coincidentally, that is identical to the percentage in the United States. 4% of the people of the United States say they suffer. And I'm pointing these things out because we're talking about secrets that are hidden in plain sight about Israel. And we want to expose some of these little secrets so that you will also, like I love Israel, you will like Israel, you will love Israel. So that I enjoy going to Israel, I want you to consider going to Israel. And I want you to be a part of blessing Israel, because there's a blessing for those who bless Israel. And I'm blessed today to have a dear friend, Pastor Wayne Hilsden from King of Kings Community in Jerusalem with us. And we've got some things to talk about Israel. You've been there over 30 years, and you've been in faithful ministry the entire time. It's remarkable. It's fantastic.
I love Israel. I love the people. I love the land. I'm a privileged person. I really am.
One of the important realities, one of the secrets that I think needs to be exposed is that there's a challenge that exists to the church in Israel, to the church abroad. And you're kind of, in a way, in the middle of this because you're a credible guy, you're a rational guy, you're well respected in pretty much all circles among believers in the land. A lot of people aren't aware of the Christ at the Checkpoint forum. You've had the privilege of being directly involved, and I'd like you to explain where it came from, what it has done, and perhaps how it might change in the future.
So Christ at the Checkpoint was an initiative taken by Bethlehem Bible College. It's a Palestinian Arab school in Bethlehem in the West Bank, what I prefer to call Judea, the biblical name. And it was a conference that was called to address issues related to Christian Zionism, related to the nation of Israel and injustice, and Palestinians saying, we're being mistreated, here's the real truth, the world is not hearing the message. The impression given that most of the world is pro-Israel, or maybe more true to say evangelical Christians are generally pro-Israel and in some cases anti-Palestinian. And so it was an effort to get their narrative and their perspective to the media and to the Christian world in particular. I was asked to speak over 2 years ago. They gave me a subject that I am passionate about, and the message was on the ongoing role of the Jewish people in God's purposes. There is a teaching in parts of the church, even in some evangelical churches, that when Israel, for the most part, rejected Jesus as Messiah, then God rejected them. God replaced the Jewish people, the chosen people, with a new people, a new race, as it were, a church primarily made up of Gentiles. They are the new chosen people over against the ancient chosen people who have, by default, by unbelief, become no longer his people. I believe that that's a lie of the devil. I believe that the Bible teaches clearly that God has an ongoing purpose for Israel. Romans chapter 9, 10, and 11 clearly spells that out. Paul asked the rhetorical question, verse 1 of chapter 11, has God cast away his people Israel? He says, certainly not. His first proof is, I'm a Jew. I'm really a Jew, and I believe in Jesus. I've given my life to him. If God's rejected his people, what's a good Jew like me doing following Jesus? So that's post-crucifixion. This is post-so-called rejection of Jesus as Messiah. And he's saying, it's obvious that God still has a plan for me and the other Jews. Later in the text, it says in verse 29 that the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable, without repentance. The call of the Jewish people has not ended. They still have a role to play. And in these last days, that they will resume that divine calling to be a light to all the nations of the earth. Now, back to Christ at the checkpoint. I declared that message as clearly and as faithfully to the word as I could. Frankly, I didn't get any antagonism toward me from even the Palestinians that were present in the room. And I think increasingly there's an openness to my particular view, even on the Palestinian side. In fact, many Palestinians who didn't attend that event understand that God has an ongoing role for the Jewish people, and in fact did not want to go to the conference because that's what they believe, and they felt that they would be intimidated by the other side if they attended. But I felt that the Lord led me to go to present that message. I didn't compromise. And in fact, I've been invited now to other conferences of a similar kind. I spoke in Philadelphia back in December, and it was called Impact Holy Land. Some of the same speakers that speak at Christ at the Checkpoint were there. And so even after I presented my very strong case for the ongoing role of the Jewish people in God's purposes, I was asked to say that again and be who I am and give my perspective. So that's my understanding of Christ at the Checkpoint. They will continue, it appears, to organize such conferences in the future. I think it's fair to let them speak their mind as long as they continue to invite people that have a different perspective.
Do you feel that they are being used, in a sense, by those who would want to mislead people around the world, and particularly among the evangelicals here in America? It's propaganda.
The reality is the ones who are most vehemently opposed to Christian Zionism and Israel as a nation are outsiders. They're not actually the Palestinians within Judea and Samaria. These are people that come in, they help organize the conference, they get a platform, they say, they do their spiel, but are not actually living in the land and actually knowing the reality on the ground.
There's a movement within America to influence college students, and university campuses are becoming hotbeds of, I would have to call it nothing less than propaganda, anti-Israel, anti-Christian viewpoints fueled by pro-Palestinian groups.
Right. I'm part of a ministry in Israel called the Jerusalem Institute of Justice. It's led by Caleb Myers, who is a Messianic Jew and a lawyer. And he is actively going to campuses around the world now and giving the other side of the story. He's a bold voice, and I support him wholeheartedly. And I've had opportunities from time to time also to speak in a university context and present what I believe is the biblical view concerning Israel.
Have you been received well, and conversely, have there been efforts to oppose your viewpoint while you're there?
Certainly. But I think that I do my best to present my views not in a way that is overly offensive. I think I try to be kind in my remarks. I think that makes a huge difference, the tone in which we present the truth.
We'd like to present some of the materials, some of the video that you have, and when we return in just a moment, I want to show you some things that I think will also help let the secret be exposed, those secrets hidden in plain sight. Please stay tuned.